So for those who don't know, Imagine Spaces is a kind of creative, critical teaching resource that Gail and I established out of our own interest in essaying and writing as a way of finding out what one thinks about something, as a way of responding to contemporary culture, to ideas about aesthetics and being in the world. And it's just a thrill to have tonight, as part of our conversation series, a really exciting publisher, punching way above her weight in terms of creating impact on the literary stage, with a really, really exciting writer of fiction. So we have Jess Chandler and Amy Arnold. And Jess, through Prototype, has published Amy's second novel, Laurie and Joe, and we're going to be party to a conversation between these two women, talking about what it is they've made together in creating this fiction and publishing it and bringing it to all of us. I was thrilled when I was over at Ullapool in the Cayley Place bookshop a couple of weeks ago to see Laurie and Joe everywhere on one wall. And this is the kind of thing that Jess is doing with Prototype. And it's just, yeah, really thrilling to see alternative texts coming to us and making themselves seen and heard. So the event, super mellow, super relaxed. We've got Jess and Amy talking with each other. We're going to have Amy reading, and we're going to be hearing them talking about passages from the book. And then we'll turn it over to you. We'd love to hear questions. We love the idea of Imagine Spaces being a place for conversation. We'd love to think that any and all of you will continue to contribute to what we're doing here by, letting us see your own work and sharing your own writing and ideas with us, and having plans for things that perhaps you'd like to be part of as part of this Imagine Spaces adventure. So again, welcome everybody, and most of all, welcome to Amy and Jess. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kirsty, for such a warm and lovely introduction, and for inviting us. Just to give a little bit of context, Kirsty has been a fantastic supporter of Amy's work from her first novel and with this, and also took part in our launch we had in London, where we were forced out of a flooded bookshop into a nearby park, and Kirsty was just amazingly game and calm and wonderful. So thank you for sharing with us in that slightly unusual launch experience. I'm just going to say a few quick words about Prototype before I hand over to Amy, who's going to read from the novel before we start talking about it. So I started Prototype in 2019 with the aim really of publishing fiction and poetry, and occasionally slightly more experimental collaborative projects, but looking for work that somehow sits outside of the mainstream and requires a more creative and daring approach in terms of the way either it's edited, conceived in physical form, and just to see, with a belief, I suppose, that it's possible to take on ambitious free-form writing, but to show that it can have just as wide a readership as more commercial work, because I believe, and I think the responses to quite a few of our work has shown how true that is, and that we should not be underestimating our readers, that people actually love more challenging work. Amy's book, I rarely sit and read a submission in one sitting. It's just completely, it moved me, and the language just completely drew me in immediately, as did the story and this incredible portrait, or being inside the mind of this fascinating character. It's a really striking piece of work, which I had absolutely no doubts about wanting to publish as soon as I'd read it. So I feel extremely lucky that Amy gave me the opportunity to do so. I think it's best we let you all hear something from the book so that you will see exactly why I fell for it, and then we'll talk a bit more about the text itself and the publishing process.
Thank you, Jess. It's just, well, we're going to talk a lot more about how great it's been to work together, but I always hate the moment you have to introduce a book you've written, because you don't know, should I talk about the plot, the narrative, the characters, the setting, or some strange idea that you might have had about form. But, you know, at the end of the day, you've got your blurb on the back of the book for a reason. So I'll just quickly paraphrase. So it's this book is called Laurie and Joe. It's about an older couple who've lived in the Lake District for a long time, and one November morning, Laurie brings Joe his morning coffee and she finds that he's dead. So she decides not to call an ambulance or the doctor, but she goes for a walk, as she'd planned to do, over the fells. And so the book takes place over a single day, and the reader basically follows Laurie on her walk over the fells. And as she walks, she just reflects on their life together, gradually revealing a kind of extraordinary, ordinary life. So the section I'm going to read is about 20 pages in, and I think it's just really representative of the style of the whole book. And but also it's quite it gives a lot away about Laurie and Joe's relationship, so that's really important. And also, it's really nice we selected a section with music in, because it's the first time I've been able to read something about music, but there's a big music theme. Joe's a classical musician and Laurie knows nothing about music. So there's a lot to talk about music, more esoterically later, I suppose. So I'll just set up this section so you actually understand what's going on. So she's walking across the fell. She's left Joe dead, and she's remembering listening to a piece of music they listened to when they first moved to the Lake District. They'd moved up from Birmingham 20 years earlier. And so it does slip between the past and the present, and it's quite subtle. So if you suddenly don't know where you are, you've slipped between different times. And I'll just read, and hopefully it will make some sense. It was Finzi he had us listen to later, Laurie thinks, and she rubs her eye, and she rubs the other eye, and she sees the pair of them standing in the living room, Joe and Laurie, Laurie and Joe, and she hears the music coming out from the speakers. Piano music, she thinks, and she listens to the piano, and she hears a weight inside its notes, a familiar weight, and she thinks, of course the piano is a percussion instrument, yes. Sometimes the note needs to be struck. Yes, she hears it almost as easily as she hears the rain at the window, and she listens to the piano. She hears it drop its heavy notes, one note after the other. It drops, and well, she hardly would have recognised it before, but yes, the rain up here has this same weight. And she hears the notes coming out into the living room, and it's as if she knows the rain will be made over and over again, and she thinks, for all eternity, if she can let herself think like that. And she looks over at Joe, and he opens his mouth, and out comes a sound that hardly belongs to him. No, the sound belongs there with the piano, she thinks. And she closes her eyes, and the piano makes its heavy notes, and she hears Joe sing, and she turns and looks out of the window, and she sees that the fell has almost disappeared inside the music. And well, let the music take the fell, she thinks, because all things considered, the fell's a lot to handle from a window when she's used to front doors and living room windows, to streets bending and folding around her like intestines. And now, yes, she feels so far from home, and she thinks it's probably the music that's making her feel like this. Yes, almost all music makes her feel so far from home, or as if she's never been home. And she hears Joe sing, and she thinks, we don't belong here. Joseph, my Joe. And if the weight comes from anywhere, it's from behind the notes, because there isn't anything in the notes themselves. And she hears Joe sing, and she thinks, and she hears the words, and earth, and she hears the words, and air, and rain, and she hears that rain is neither finished nor unfinished. And now she'll cry, she thinks, because she almost understands what those words mean. Yes, all the weather they have now, all this rain, she thinks, it strips something away from you. And Laurie wraps her arms around herself and looks out across the valley at the fell, and she thinks, it'll come down all night. And Laurie rubs at both eyes, at the left eye and the right eye, and she thinks, yes, we had music all the time, we had singing. And she thinks it doesn't pay to rhapsodize, because if she's sure of one thing, it's that she didn't always like the music that poured out into their living room. No, sometimes the music would speak, and sometimes it wouldn't. And she doesn't know the first thing. She doesn't even know what an aria is. And she thinks, how can you marry a musician and not know about arias or lieder? How can a relationship like that ever? And she thinks, no. He can go out in the yard. If he really have to sing, he can take himself out there. And why does he still need to? She thinks, no. He's never understood why he still needs to. And as far as she's concerned, he's altogether better outside than in, she thinks. Because if there's one thing that gets to her, it's the shuffling. It's those fucking slippers. And already she's thinking it again, thinking, pick up your feet, Joe. And he won't sit through more than the news headlines these days. He'll keep his hands pressed flat on the arm of the sofa, readying himself, Laurie thinks. And it isn't going too far to say she feels the tension her end. Yes, it comes across the back strut and in through her head, and she'll have to give up on leaning back the way she likes to, because she can't be thinking about the tension in Joseph's arm if she wants to keep abreast of what's happening in the world. And, well, she'd be hard pushed to say what actually is happening. She can't think. No, she can't, and last night was a bad one. That's enough for me, love, he said, and she feels it her end of the sofa. Yes, it takes him forever to push himself up and out, and almost every evening she sits there watching the news headlines with her teeth all tight, thinking, pillock. She thinks it again when he pushes himself across the flagstone in those slippers. Nobody thinks pillock, Laurie thinks. And the slippers have got open backs. He curls his toes when he walks. He must do, she thinks, and, well, she wastes far too much time conjuring up images of his toes inside his socks, inside his slippers. Yes, she's only got to hear him scraping and she starts conjuring. He'll end up with hammer toe, she thinks, or does she mean claw toe? And she thinks, last night was a bad one. Yes, slippers as usual. Then all the trouble trying to get the lid off the honey jar, and she likes to watch the news. Yes, they'll sit themselves down a few minutes before 9. The 9 o'clock news, Laurie says, and she thinks, Peter Sissons is going strong at least. Yes, Peter Sissons can't be more than a few years off Joe, one side or the other, although it's hardly fair to compare, she thinks. If Peter Sissons went to Oxford University, which must be a notch above Joe's School of Music, and she thinks, you're a pillock yourself. 4 O-levels, almost 5, she thinks, and should be hard pushed to remember last night's headlines. An earthquake in Greece, somewhere over there, she thinks, and, well, it goes to show she isn't totally oblivious. Yes, it's good to know some of it gets through despite the shuffling. And she'd heard him in the kitchen with the honey jar. She'd heard his little squeezing sounds, and she'd almost shouted out. The house can't cope with the noise, she thinks. She's only got to spill a few grains of rice or sugar over the flagstones and the whole kitchen throbs. And she's spent enough time teaching herself to be careful with that over the years. Yes, she's earned herself a steady hand, and she thinks Joe isn't bothered. It's as and when with him, yes. All his little voyages across the flagstones. Every time she hears him, she thinks, pick up your feet, Joe. Or just wear socks. Yes, wear socks. And why is she saying that now? Doesn't she understand? No. Well, no, she thinks, because she can't get herself over the shuffling, the sound of felt against stone, and she lines up her incisors. She holds them for a slow 10, or until she feels her jaw twitch. The left side gives up first, she thinks. Yes, she's weaker on the left, and it's the same with the eye, or is it the right side with the eye? And Laurie walks on up the bridleway, and she thinks, we're done with the shuffling then. Yes, she got what she asked for in the end. And she walked right in on him with the honey jar last night. She stood in the doorway and watched him wrestle with the lid. And what is it his hand makes her think of when it grips like that? And it clamps down. A creature of some sort. A tarantula. A mantis, maybe, Laurie thinks. And this is the 4th time. Yes, his is the 4th body she's set eyes on.
You, Amy, such a good passage to start with, because I think it captures so many of the crucial things, both about the story but also the style of your writing. I wonder, should we start by talking about music, because I think it's it's definitely one of the things that was so important to me when reading this, and both in terms of the way it's written, but also we both share a kind of background as musicians, and I think music's both a subject in the book, and also, you can't help but think about music, and knowing that you're a musician, it seems so clearly there in the style of your prose, both in the sort of the rhythmic quality, the way it kind of has these refrains that come, and just you just have an ear. It feels it's so lovely hearing it read. So I think just thinking about music and all the different things that are important about it, maybe you could talk a little bit about how, or the sort of thinking, or how much music and your love and understanding of music was present during the writing.
Well, it's a difficult question, Jess.
Yeah.
So, but a good one. And the thing is, I'm going to disappoint all the writers out there now, because I feel like music, well, no, okay, it's not disappoint, but music seems to be able to do something that writing can't do. And I also can't even explain that thing in words. And I know that lots of writers have tried this thing, right? Because writing about music is really flipping difficult, because music's music and writing's writing. And if you love something, you want to write about it. That's the thing. Or rather, you can't keep it out of your writing, because it keeps forcing its way in. And I guess, I mean, it's really, really hard to say, but the time there's that question there of, can writing do to some extent, rather than writing about music, can you see, can writing copy music, or can it do the same things? Does it have the flexibility? It has its own, language. There's a language in music, there's a language in writing. Can't we use those two languages to have the same emotional effect on people? And turns out, no, you can't. Well, not if you're me, but presumably, there are many different ways of getting at it. But I like your observation that it's more than just the words and the line length. It's bringing back ideas. It's changing things, morphing things, the unsaid things. That, I mean, it's integrated. Do you know what I mean?
I also think, and it comes through very clearly in that passage, that it becomes this sort of cause of a lot of Laurie's insecurity. It's like it's a sort of intellectual higher thing that she feels she doesn't have the sort of understanding of. There's this constant sort of sense of inferiority, isn't there? Or kind of particularly based around this music and this, what college he went to. But of course, I love that she's a sort of poet. Her language is so beautiful, and I like this idea that she may not be aware of it, but she also has this incredibly musical and sort of poet.
I think that's what I really love.
Yeah.
Because I think it gives her the opportunity to, the reader the opportunity to know that actually probably she's the really musical one. And so in a previous life, I used to teach secondary music, and then you'd get these kids, you get the ones who've had violin lessons from the first moment they could pick up an instrument, or and then you get these kids who just come in and they've done nothing, and yet you can tell right away they've just got something there. And it isn't, okay, yes, they don't know what an aria is. Do you need to in order to appreciate it? No, you don't, because as the book goes through, you understand that she's actually looked at the whole of her life as a metaphor, with music as a metaphor in it. And I love that literature and music, they're not, you don't have to be anyone.
No.
You just have to like it. That's all that's required to pay attention, I think.
And there's just a sort of instinctiveness, which I think is the writing itself feels, I mean, in terms of trying to capture a mind as it moves through these thoughts, that in itself is there's this sort of lyricism. And I think the way that you've managed to do that is just totally brilliant. I've rarely, I actually think that this is a sort of writing that a lot of people attempt. Just thinking about the sort of submissions I sometimes receive, I think there's what you've done and succeeded to do is very hard to do well. And I wonder if I won't go on about music all the time because there's lots of other things to talk about, but I wonder if there's something there in you that the quality of your prose is so striking because of that.
I think was really rigorous with so I'm rigorous with myself, but not in a way that to keep it. So I think there's, you know, I think Hemingway says you need a shit detector, you know, a bullshit detector, and you do, but it's that the moment you start trying to get away from the actual thing, I think I just really have practice catching myself saying it's not about me, it's not about me, and this is what I'm trying to do, and just keeping my ear to it. Make any sense?
But
you can easily, like, so often I'd get stuck and I'd be like, why am I stuck? It's because I wanted to put something in it. And the moment your will sort of takes over is the moment it feels like writing. And I guess the thing is, when you listen to a really good piece of music or you read a good piece of writing, the writer, the composer, they just disappear.
Yeah.
It's not about
that total merging of form and content, isn't it?
And it's the experience you want as a reader. You don't, I mean, sometimes I recently read a book, I won't say what it was, but a very, very good writer. And I thought, well, I could never write like, you know, this. I mean, it's true, I couldn't. But it's the feeling of that's very clever.
Yeah.
Is quite a different feeling to the one I want to have as a reader. I'm not
Definitely.
saying.
I agree. It feels
I mean,
kind of
really
a bit tricksy, can't it?
Yes.
I wonder if it would be worth talking about, just as I know we're sort of, if we're trying to think about processes and the work on the book, that kind of attention to detail and some of the discussions we had about commas and capital letters, you know, there was a lot of, because in a way the temptation with this was to just let it be exactly as the way Amy had written it, because it's so clearly intentional. But once we started looking closely, you sort of thought, well, probably need a bit of consistency, and but then you know, how do you apply those rules? And because there also needs to be variation, it's, you know, the rules sometimes need to be broken. But we did the main editorial discussions we had were about very little things like that, like should there always be a comma after she thinks, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was after she thinks or not. And then, but you know, I mean, actually, Jess, you stayed sane over this, and I nearly went mad.
You quietly go mad. You kept that. You stayed very calm on the outside.
Because I mean, the thing is, I'd written it absolutely as it sounds, and it turns out, well, we're only gifted with a comma or you know, there's a few things that we're gifted with, and there aren't really enough. You know, so is there a gap or isn't there? How long is that? Can we go on to the next line? You know, all those things are so important to me, because just want it, because I just want people to hear it. You know, and so in the first writing, you know, when I hadn't put my comma after she thinks, I think we ended up doing them after
we did.
I know that I'd heard it as run on.
Yeah.
But actually, I think that was right. I think that was the right decision. But
I think so. I think rhythmically, it was. But I remember, you know, I think you had a very clear answer for every single instance. You know, there was always a reason for things. I suppose the key is to make sure that reason's going to come through to the reader.
I think that's right, because all reasons can be. I mean, actually, I know that I started to get a bit ridiculous, but you know, I was reading Jon Fosse recently, and the other name, his recent one that was shortlisted for last year's international, and it you know, so he has a thing, I think it was, I can't remember, it was a sort of tag like that, and I actually was really put off by the changes in punctuation, so and it disturbed me. So I think there's definitely it was definitely a good call, because that thing of not wanting the reader to notice, they need to not,
apart from when something changes and then they do
apart
notice.
from a deliberate, distinct, not a really, really, really subtle change. I think that's so. That was a crazy, though. We went through
and it's sort of obsessiveness, isn't it? But I suppose that's what editing is about. It's those real little details. And I'm sure that care does come through, even if it's not the best thing. I suppose is that it's not noticed. I just noticed Kirsty put something into the chat. I don't know if Kirsty, this was intended for later, but it's interesting. He said, are we talking about speaking and saying as a form of singing? That reminds me as well, Amy, another thing we discussed. Do you remember we put in an epigraph?
Yeah.
The Brecht, which I've actually got here. And in the end, we removed it because we noticed it was appearing in lots and lots of books. But the quote is, in the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there would also be singing about the dark times. And it seemed to suddenly appear a lot during COVID. And I love it. And I remember suggesting to Amy we add that in because it felt
I loved
so,
it too.
yeah. And I think it was just like, oh, we were worried, or maybe I was worried that it might seem we were sort of borrowing it from lots of other people, which wasn't actually the case. But I think that idea of singing, I remember, maybe I even had a moment of suggesting alternative titles that indicated the importance of music and singing, which it was right that we stuck with the title as it is. But yes, that idea of singing, I think it's, what do you think? Was that something in your mind?
My answer is I don't know.
Don't know. Yeah.
I'm not a singer. Well, as much as anything else. And that passage I've just read now was actually, so Finzi did these wonderful, set these Thomas Hardy poems to music. And, I just thought this was, actually, that was me just writing about it because I was mesmerized by that thing.
Yeah.
And I think singing has its own purity again. It's a different thing again.
I occasionally sing not very well. Yeah, I agree. But I suppose, there is a singing quality to the language as well. I think that is true about your writing, but what that means,
what it actually means,
is something. Yeah, I don't know what that exactly means.
But I think so when I was writing the whole time, I had music in my head and I had a lot of singing in my head. So I'm not saying, my answer is I don't know, because I think so much of this book has become conscious to me after publication, which is really, really strange. You find things in, I think probably everybody does this. You write about something before you know about it consciously.
And then you have to sort of explain it. And
yes. I mean, I know that I was listening a lot to a lot of singing, and it must just penetrate in an unconscious way, I'm guessing. And it's interesting you hear it. So, and also it's that thing of, if someone hears it, then that's enough, isn't it?
Is that, definitely. Gail's just added an interesting, I don't know if you can see these, Amy, but I'll read out Gail's. This is related, but for me there's an interesting imaginative tension between the body, the heft and weight of the body, absolutely true, and the landscape as well, and the disembodied voice, like music, with all those loops, porousness between times. I haven't read the full thing, but I think I was thinking about that as well in the extract that you read, and sort of building on that, the constant presence of the landscape and of nature, of the weather, that there's this very, I think maybe next we should talk about landscape, and even just, chatting before we started, you've been walking, climbing in the fells today is part of your life. It's very much a part of the life of this book, and there is that sort of, this sort of very physical setting, and the disembodied voice. That's such a nice way that Gil's put it. Interesting.
I think.
What do you think? I'm not really saying. I'm not
really
sure.
Interesting. No, I think it's really interesting, and I think, again, it's my problem with language as an incomplete system. And so I think it's just one of the things, when I'm not at all an experienced tutor of writing, but when I do see my students work, I see a real problem with with being able to sort of translate feelings, you know, and once someone starts throwing in adjective after adjective or whatever, I just go numb, you know, I'm completely numb with it. And I suppose I feel like I didn't really get it right here, but I think, you know, so we have to try not to do cliches, but not just to not do them, but just to get it right. And you know, where do we really feel things? And I think I had to kind of, you know, talking of disembodied, but I had to embody that actual, just sit and just really wait until I knew where, you know. So it's a very physical, I feel like, the landscape, but the body itself is very physical, and keep returning to those things. And then you've got this ethereal music on the side. But I think it's a really difficult thing in writing to. So you're feeling something massive. There's your protagonist feeling something massive, and then once you start using a massive word, you've destroyed it. And I, you know, I don't know how to teach it, and I don't really know how to get around it, but I feel that sort of having the, I mean, I think a lot of the time we're not actually aware of what's going on in our bodies, but if we do wait and feel things, that's where a lot of our emotions live. So we don't just, we might say we're sad, but how do we know that? How do we actually know? And we somehow there's some signal for us, but we, you know, as writers, we just want to go, oh, it was this, and it was so dramatic, and I felt so terrible, and my husband had died, and you know, and I didn't have you know, what I wanted in life, and you know, how do you do that without switching people off? I think
I think it's also, it's hard to avoid, I mean, and you have managed to do this, but you know, the landscape, maybe particularly the Lake District, with its sort of such a weighty
cliche, that was
history,
dreaded.
but it can, but yeah, it's not at all. You know, you could be like, oh, and she felt sad and she saw a mountain in the clouds, and or it started rain. It started to rain. You know, that never happened. The landscape and the weather is always there, but it never feels like it's just reinforcing a point or kind of symbolizing a particular feeling or response. It's there and it sort of has its own life. Yet at the same time, it is reflecting what's happening, but in a very, very subtle way.
Thinking in when I started it, I was thinking, well, I remember first of all years ago reading The Sea, thinking that does that wonderfully. It's really, really, it's just there. And that was kind of my model, obviously not the language, not anything else other than this sort of like, no, you can't deny the landscape. When you have a massive landscape, a sea or a fell, like when I wrote this book, I didn't have a view of the fells, and now I'm sitting here and I really do have, now I have an amazing, I'm looking at it now.
Wow.
And all the time I sit here, and it's every morning you open this big curtain and you're like, what, you know, it's your life, it is your life. And it, you know, it's, you don't really need to overuse it, do you? In the same way that when you read novels about London, people aren't deliberately forcing it in. You just feel in a good London novel like you're there. And because somehow people think, oh, when it's the land, you know, when it's the Lake District, you need to start waxing lyrical, but not if you've lived there for 20 years.
No, there's a definite kind of ordinariness.
And I think that's the reality. Most people who live here, people who've lived here for a long time, just really, really don't. They notice it, but it's not. It's not about wonder and splendor. It's just about sort of a reflection of the mood and the. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody cares, but it influences them. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, and I think Laurie is a character that there's a sort of ordinariness, or she certainly has this sense of being ordinary, and I think it's wonderful to have a protagonist, or you know, the whole novel is in Laurie's voice, and it's very refreshing to have that voice, you know, to read a novel in that kind of voice, which I think is all too unusual in fiction, you know.
Why do you think it is? Why do you think it is unusual?
Yeah, why do I think that? I suppose I wonder if it's interesting. I think this book is both sort of simple in many ways in terms of the story, but actually also actually a lot of quite major things have happened in their life, and just the whole premise of finding a dead body is quite dramatic. I wonder if we sort of always want something that seems more extraordinary, but then this is doing such a good job of showing us how extraordinary that everybody's lives are. Once we start to go inside anybody's mind and to really understand the sort of depth of experience and emotion,
and I think the fear
is fascinating.
The fear as a writer, and maybe you have this same fear as a publisher, is that so of course you're like, this doesn't sell. You're writing it and you're like, it's not, it's interesting to me. Is it interesting to anyone else? Probably not. And the thing is, there's no real hook. There's no real drama. I mean, there is drama, of course.
Yeah.
But it's I think we both have to be brave.
Yeah.
in our own way, don't we? And but I mean, honestly, of course, I would only write the books that I'm interested in. Of course, if I knew there were other books that were trying to do the most ordinary thing is always what I would like to read every single time. You know, because actually what I really want is connection with people. And if somebody's got something so extraordinary, I might not relate. I just want this, come in and I'll show you that you're not alone in this experience. Or
definitely.
So what do you think?
That's why it's so, you know, you feel instantly drawn to Laurie and you want to know. And I think also there's a sort of, we all have a kind of nosiness about it, like learning about somebody's kind of inner life, and just the sort of secrets of their marriage is completely fascinating. And actually
but for you, but do you think it really generally is? Because in real life, people have sped up to the point of not really actually being interested in other people. And my question, well, it's a question to you really, is do you think it's not? I mean, if people were really interested in other people, they'd ask them about themselves. And, you know, it doesn't often happen that people are interested in other. I mean, you don't often have those conversations, do you? Where people really.
And it's special when you do, isn't it?
Yeah. They're very memorable. So I guess I'd like.
Yeah.
What do you really think about that?
I think we are. I think maybe publishers think we're not, and therefore don't market books that aren't sort of, you know, don't have a sort of key gripping thing on the back cover. I think that's our responsibility, or why I want to be a publisher, is because I do actually believe that people love reading about a character like Laurie and will be drawn and feel a kind of more care and interest and probably understanding than in a book about something totally distant. I do think people care about it. I just think maybe we've forgotten, or we're not given the opportunity to read enough books that do that. I mean, if we haven't, then we've got to bring it back. We've got to make people care. You know, surely that's that we have to care about each other. I mean that sounds sort of dramatic, but it's true, right?
No, we must care. And I think that's the thing. But I also think that people must care, not just you and a handful of others, but people must care about this sort of writing.
And it
can't be left to, you know, I mean,
it can't just be us.
It can't just be an individual thing, you know. It's like trying to solve the climate problem. You know, okay, so you know, a few people are super careful, everyone else is jetting all over the world, you know. you know,
that's the major challenge, isn't it? How do you make other people
in
aware?
UK, your reach
Mm.
isn't the same as you know, the big guys, big boys, and well, the reason why is because you've chosen based on entirely different set of values.
But I also think there's a sort of patience and perseverance to the whole kind of project, maybe, in that it's it's a slower thing, but I think it has an effect. I think with time that group and community grows, and I also think that community has an influence on the bigger publishing houses. That could be quite annoying, that it may be that sort of approach gets stolen from the indies who do a lot of the groundwork, but I think that it does trickle down. I think it does spread, and
it's not really the time kind of saying, oh, I want, you know, that you want it to be grabbed and mass marketed. It's not that, is it? It's that you
want to say, I love this book, I want everybody I know to read it and love it and pass it on to their friends. And I think, you know, also thinking about kind of marketing and publicity and the way the world is since COVID, you know, the review spaces are limited to almost nothing. It's sort of impossible. And I think that word of mouth and community is more important, and that's actually what, with the exception of the big things, you know, the few books that, like the new Zadie Smith, but it's actually, that's where a lot of successes can develop. It's through that community. I think I had a meeting with an agent last week who said to me, actually, you know, we're seeing with all sorts of our clients' books that the reviews don't really do anything anymore, that actually if you can have a kind of grassroots community, that's where, you know, that's when things really take off. Yes, Kirsty, I think Kirsty says, can she, or Gail says, can we bring other people in? I'm happy. I was just going to, Amy, if you're happy,
on that note, I was just going to expand it and invite other people to put their hands up.
Yeah, because sorry, it's already 45 minutes.
Actually, because on that note about kind of reading and what readers think about the book and how they engage with the book, the kinds of questions it opens up for them. I mean, this is a fascinating book. So could I invite other people in the actual room to come and join us and ask questions?
I'm a secondary school English teacher, and I teach a creative writing course as well as doing my own writing. And I mean, every year they have their choice. They either do a personal reflective essay, as it is called, which you say that is you writing about yourself, or you write a short story that is you writing about other people. And obviously, as writers, we know that the boundaries between those two things are very blurry. Most teenagers just think that there's nothing extraordinary in their life to write about, and yet if you can get them to let their guard down and tell you about whatever enthuses them, whatever makes them angry, whatever, and it is about zooming in and noticing the details of what they actually feel and think. Then
and do they feel good when they've done it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I think there's a therapeutic value in it as much as the satisfaction in creating. Well, certainly what I tell them is a worthwhile piece of art.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think, you know, is this problem with the looking for the extraordinary. It's a real problem. I mean, it's only everything's extraordinary if you look at it and you understand it. It's only a perception.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I always think it's, you know, more or less everyone can more or less use words in a more or less okay way, but you know, if someone's seen something, I mean, we have to see something in order to write about it. And, you know, teenagers see stuff, don't they? And they understand stuff about their own lives, you know, that we can't get our heads around. So there are things to say. It's a matter of whether they've can be taught to reflect on it, I guess, and whether it believe that it's of some relevance.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, I mean, yeah, it takes time, and you have to give them the space to come to those ideas themselves. But I mean, I think what teenagers end up being really good at writing about is their own families, and you know, the essays where they reflect on their parents' divorce and the impact that is had, and when they are brave enough to say, I know I was meant to feel like this, but I didn't. This is how I felt. It's yeah, and then and then as soon as they've shared it with you, they're like, do not show that to anyone else ever. You know, it's because
that shows it's good then.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly that, and that's exactly what I tell them when I'm trying to get them to choose a topic. Is if it's a topic that you are scared to share with people, you're probably onto something there, because that is what's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should have a general level of fear whilst writing at all times. I would say as a rule. Yeah, you've got to be a little bit afraid of it. And a lot of people don't understand that instruction of, you know, being brave. They don't really know what it means. But it's hard to. I mean, I don't know how you tell. I don't know how you become brave or otherwise. You know.
Yeah.
But it's an important, necessary thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think in tying into what you were talking about in the publishing industry, it's, well, you become brave by seeing examples of other people being brave, and you learn from that. So
Yeah,
when there are examples out there,
do you think that's the problem, Jess? There's not much. I mean, I think there's not much bravery in the publishing industry, and there's probably not.
No, there definitely isn't.
And so where do those people get their examples of real brave writing? You know, it's hard, but when you do get it, you're like, oh, you know, it spurs you on to be, you know.
I think I feel there's more of it possibly in poetry, because there's so many small publishers that are sort of often.
But isn't poetry like a little holding? It feels like a little
maybe
brave. I mean, I definitely. I'm not dissing poetry because it's my favorite. You know, it's very much, you know, that's where especially young people pour out their hearts, isn't it? It's quite
it's
after doing that in a novel, I think. Or
that's true. It's true. Although more and more poets seem to be writing novels, which is definitely a good thing.
Yeah, they do it.
But it's a good question. There needs to be more bravery, definitely. And that's, you know, that's in terms of subject, but also sort of style and
all sorts of. I mean, I think the thing is, it's the, you know, people often ask questions about form, but if the writer knows what the message is, then the form tells itself to the writer, and then that should be all right to expect, rather than going, I'm going to write a piece that's, you know, because then you're stuck. What do I see this as at the end? Oh, actually, you know, because what I'm writing at the moment is, I mean, I think I might have bitten off more than I can chew, but you know, it's told itself to me right from the beginning, and I'm like, this is you know, this is the only way. It may or may not succeed. And that's
but the form is just clear.
It's just built in. It's the form is it.
Could I ask you a question about form then, Amy? I'm not a novelist, and I don't write fiction. I write a little bit of poetry at the side, and then I write essays on the side. So I don't really understand fiction in the way writers do, who feel their way or who write themselves into the form. But the question kind of puzzled me, and your novel was so interesting because it's such a puzzle to me. And I'm kind of thinking about narrative. I'm thinking about choices writers make, and the biggest choice the biggest question for me is, it comes out of your use of free and direct voice, which is kind of, I suppose, a kind of modernist legacy, which allows you to move between a character's point of view and the narrator's point of view quite seamlessly, and to move in and out of time, to be able to do that in ways that don't feel completely clunky in that way.
Yeah.
So you're both inside as well as outside of the same thing, and you hold two different worlds at the same time. The thing I wanted to ask you is it's a really stupid question. Why did you choose to stay with Laurie all of the time? Because free and direct voice allows you a wider canvas, the way Woolf uses it, or the way Catherine Mansfield uses it. You go through all of those different characters. Now, I was really interested in Laurie, but I was also interested in the woman Laurie sees, if you like, who she imagines as her other almost.
And I think it's interesting because with my first novel, Slip of a Fish, I was also asked that, why couldn't you write from so and so? I mean, okay, that was in the first person, but irrespective, I think I go so much into one character that everybody's like, I don't know who this person is apart from their own perspective, and it becomes a bit claustrophobic. And I think the reason is maybe I don't have the skill, but I think the thing is I am totally inhabiting that I simply cannot go out and see that person, whoever it is, from any other perspective. You know, and I think I do know what Jo thinks of her, but do I really? And I think it's like our own lives. Do we really see what other people see about us? Well, I mean, it's quite nice that we don't, probably, but
because I did wonder that refrain about the eyes, you know, the left eye, the right eye. Were you telling us something? Which is, you know, that this is just one perspective on things.
I was it, and there was a sort of thing about what she sees and what she doesn't see. And you know, it was a bit of maybe a clunky metaphor, but it was deliberate, and it came in right at the beginning, the thing about the eyes, and you know, obviously tying in with the thing about the body, but definitely she doesn't see everything, but also I think I don't see everything as well. And I think there's this thing of like, maybe the writer should see everything, but maybe they don't. You just write what you see, and maybe I didn't know any more. I didn't know any more than I wrote. That's my answer to you.
That's why it was a stupid question.
It's not a stupid question.
Interesting.
It's a good question, annoyingly good.
There's one from Josie.
Josie,
who's put her hand up.
I write and teach memoir in all sorts of different forms. So that I'm really fascinated by what you're talking about, you know, is it claustrophobic to be in one person's head? Because obviously writing memoir, you know, my students, it's their point of view. They are the only head. They can't go into other people's head. And perhaps that's why, you know, another reason might be social media, but they don't, taking a risk on the page by writing their internal landscape is really perhaps one step further forward. I think it's all to do with the skill of the writing. Why are we not claustrophobic with Laurie? We're totally engaged and captivated, and feel with that sense of intimacy that we're allowing to share her thoughts. I love the way that you include all these little sort of tics that we all have when we're thinking, and it's done so deftly. I absolutely love that. I must say that in my classes that I teach, I'm always encouraging, of course, this sort of internal discussion, using that internal voice of thought. But it is, as Jess was saying, it's extraordinarily difficult to do well in a way that it can be seamless, that we can move in and out of our own thoughts while we're reading it. And I wondered, Amy, if you had written your own thoughts in this way, or would that be too revealing?
When I do write stuff, you know, from life, it's funny, but I will change things to, and this sounds really weird, so I change the truth to show the truth. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes what really happened in that moment doesn't really show the truth, but if you're pulling together lots of different things, this is really the truth about, this is the truth, really the real truth. But if I'm going to tell you what happened, that doesn't tell it in that moment. So I kind of condense loads of things to make up. Do you see, does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense.
So,
Yeah.
because the real truth isn't necessarily what happened, is it? The real truth is something a bit more
Something else.
out there, isn't it? Anyway, sorry, we've hogged it a bit.
Anyway, the class starts on October the 4th. It's online, and we can continue the discussion.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to ask my question, but I'm going to let Graham ask his questions. So Graham, just go.
Hello, Amy. I loved the little extract that you read out there. I'm actually dying to read the whole thing now, but I loved just how in the moment, in the present moment, it was, and how that's quite a rare quality. The passage of time in any art form is very rare, I think, and I think it's maybe a quality in music as well. There's something about experiencing the passage of time which is really important, and something we maybe don't understand enough. And I just one thing I'm not a writer. I'm more involved in visual arts, but I'm always fascinated by the role of a medium and the idea of the medium being a companion in life, almost, that through the medium things show up, stuff shows up. If you engage in the moment, if you put yourself in the moment, in the passage of time, or try and live in the moment, you're in that passing of time, and then stuff shows up. And if you have a particular point of view through the medium that you've known well or are inspired by, then particular things show up, and meaningful things, but they may not be immediately apparently meaningful. And I just wondered, in your writing process, and I'm always very reluctant to use the word process. I'm not sure entirely why, but when you were writing this, or when you're writing all things, are you kind of waiting for stuff to show up, or stuff, does it show up? And I also,
I mean, I love what you say, because I've never articulated it before, and probably never thought of it before, but it shows up. You're right. You're inside it, and you kind of just in there, and there you have it. Something arrived, and I think that's right about the different mediums. So at the moment, I'm doing a little project with my son, who's an artist. He's studying art at Edinburgh, and we're doing a little thing together, and it's really, really interesting, because we've kind of had this discussion, but we haven't articulated it as well as you did just then. But there is that I think if you can stay in time, or stay in a place, and you just can hold yourself there without racing away, there's never going to be something will always come. It is not, it's not reserved for the great geniuses of the world. I think it's an actual thing where somebody's just, I mean, I suppose it can't be much different from doing a meditation or something like that. You're never going to have a void, so stuff arrives, and it's exciting because you don't really know what's there or what's coming.
Yeah, I think being in that, when you're in that moment, then it is like people have said already, very ordinary things that become extraordinary. And I think
you seem to see them, and you just see them for what they are. I think That's the
Yeah, and I think that's what's lovely about your character.
Mm.
Sorry, but we've probably got a lag on this thing. But what's lovely about your character is that just there's this continuous stream of stuff showing up, which ought not to be that interesting. But of course, it's real stuff that's showing up for her, and it's wonderful. It's just wonderful to hear that that level of engagement with the things around her. That I think, again, it's another thing that I think we're kind of losing in our busy media saturated
and it really is. So when you're, I mean, I tend to write and then I'll go out for a long walk, and then it's only when I'm walking actually then I really solve a problem, and that itself is the thing. So I mean, it's like you're just sitting there, and then of course when you see something for what it really is, then it's linked to this, which is linked to this, which comes to this, and then and I don't know if it feels like hopping around in the book, but to me it feels like, I mean, to me it feels like the most logical way of relating ideas, but I couldn't imagine what that would be like to read. But I think it's just staying with, I mean, it's like a sort of, it's almost like a dare, just stay with it, stay and see. And is it okay to, you know, the section where she writes up something, you know, you're writing about everything from wood lice to bourbon biscuits to, you know, I mean, not that, but you know, anything, it doesn't matter, it's the stuff of life, and if it comes, it comes, and actually it's fine, isn't it? Because we all know, you know, talking about Jo's slippers, there's one bit where she says, oh, she couldn't believe how big a crumb looks once it's been squashed on the bottom of a slipper. And the thing is, everyone knows that a crumb does look very extraordinarily large on the bottom of a slipper, but you have to kind of sit and wait for it, you know. So I guess that's the fun of it, and it's you're quite lucky to do that stuff, really, because it's.
Can I just interject here and just say I can't help think that everything that you're both talking about right now is actually also a perfect description of Jess as a publisher and what she was talking about earlier in terms of paying attention to what comes up and then making that selection. And I wonder if we might just wind up this wonderful discussion by bringing you in, Jess, for the last time to reflect on these latest comments, because it just seemed to me to be a beautiful echo of everything that you're doing as a publisher there in Graham and Amy's discussion about and listening and being open.
Yeah, I think that's true. I suppose I'm also thinking about Gail's question, because I think that maybe relates, and about, she said, you know, how do we cultivate readers into an appreciation and attentiveness to different kinds of writing? I suppose maybe the responsibility of the publisher is both to be listening, be attentive and appreciative to things that appear for me, or I'm lucky enough to kind of have brought my way, but to also to sort of to share that, to do the absolute best we could, even at our small size, to really share what we believe to be important, and to kind of just keep going, and to allow to get to a point where people trust your choices and the quality of the work that you believe in, and you believe in it as a piece of work rather than any kind of commercial. Of course, that's if you believe in a piece of work, you also believe in its commercial potential, in its ability or potential to be loved by many people beyond you. I never think, oh, only I will love this book. You know, you always believe, if I love it, then I believe many other people will. So I think it's just a sort of a commitment, and kind of keeping that integrity, and that it, with time, that creates a community based on kind of trust and shared values, and that just grows. So I think, yeah, I think appreciation and attentiveness, as Gail said in her question, is very important, and that's both kind of within you as publisher and in the way that you sort of communicate with potential readers.
Well, that's just lovely. Thank you so much. I mean, gosh, the whole conversation has just been really rich and intimate. And I've loved the way these themes of paying attention and a kind of ethics of reading and an interest in detail for the sake of the human person who is revealing that detail, that these beautiful kind of themes and tones, to go back to our musical analogy, have been just running through this whole discussion. It's just been absolutely lovely. I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody who's here, and thanking you both, Jess and Amy, so much for giving up your time to be part of Imagine Spaces. And just to remind everybody again that, you know, we're here. This is like an open space. We just welcome thoughts, ideas, interventions, and anything that comes up as a result of tonight's discussion. Gail and I would love to hear from you and see it on the site. And just to leave you both, Jess and Amy, with our every good wish for getting and making a wonderful moment in the world of this beautiful book that you together have written and published. Thanks so very much. Everybody stay in touch, be on the newsletter, keep looking at the website, and soon this film will be up and you can return to it and think more thoughts about it. And we look forward to seeing you all again at the next event. And thanks again, Amy and Jess.